Hello, guys. Hello, teacher colleagues, and hello to all the people who are learning English.
Hello.
With me today is Paul Newson, uh, the leader and the owner, if I may say so, of the Newson's place in Moscow. I would say a very, very interesting school and unusual one. And I am Елена Вертугина. You know, I run the project Живой английский in St. Petersburg, and we are doing some stuff connected with lexical approach. And we're going to talk about some issues connected with teaching in school today, okay?
With pleasure.
So my first question will be, Paul, tell us about how long you have been teaching and how it all started.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I've been teaching literally all of my adult life, pretty much. After a couple of years after graduating, I actually never wanted to be a teacher when I studied at university. It's the last thing I wanted to do. But after I did, I had some interesting experiences after university, which I shouldn't say here on the video. I was suggested to become a teacher, and I felt a bit reserved about the idea. And so I just thought, okay, what the hell? Because I couldn't find a job for the life of me. Because as a linguist, there's nothing you can do in England except really teach. And if there's a job which requires, say, at the time I was German, the pay was so low because I understood that a language is really a secondary skill behind, say, like, marketing, finance, IT, engineering, and something like that. And so basically, I decided to go into teaching because I thought it might be an interesting idea. I did that was, God, how old was I? 23. So yeah, I've been teaching for like 18 years. I went to do a GTP program, which is called a graduate training program, and that's where, because we're in dire need of teachers in England, and we still are, I actually was thrown into the deep end where I had to actually start teaching and train at the same time. So I was assigned to a secondary school to teach German to low-level kids, and that's how it all started. And I just wanted to die for the first few months. It was hell on earth. And I basically got my qualifications. I got my course called a PGCE. I stayed there on there one more year, and then it just wasn't for me in England, mainly because I just didn't like the curriculum. I didn't like the system. So I moved out to Germany, and I was teaching in a high school there for 2 years, and then came to Russia in 2006, where I started with a school in Moscow.
Yeah, I wanted to stop you there, and
Fair
I wanted
enough.
to ask you. So, Paul, let's say, okay, it's been 14 years, yes, that you are in Russia.
Yep.
So, did you start teaching English in Russia as soon as you came?
Yes, I did, immediately.
Okay, so Paul 14 years ago and Paul now, what's the difference?
Oh, yeah. I can say that, like, personally, I've grown up a lot. Because when I first came, Moscow was just a strange and unusual place, and I had to latch on to other expats to, find my bearings, to get to know my way around this place and how everything worked. And I did it pretty quickly. And I think when I first came here, I was already considered a strong teacher, because, because that was really my first step into EFL, because before I was teaching in standard high schools, like in England and in Germany, and so I remember talking to some teachers who complained about having 10 kids in a class, and I said, try having 36 and managing. So EFL for me was really simple by comparison. And I would say that, of course, my knowledge of English was nowhere near as strong as it is now, because it's been a constant process of, mastering the vocab, mastering my examples that I give to students, as well as, knowing the grammar inside out and thinking about how best I can teach it. So I would say what I have noticed over these years that's changed is that the results I get are much, 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 much higher. And the retention rate is much higher than before as well.
It just happens together with your growth.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a teacher, the results grow the same way.
Yeah, I became a lot more confident as well, I would say, because when I found my bearings in Moscow, I got to know the sort of Russian mentality and what students expect, and then I started to adjust my teaching towards it, and that's when things really started to happen. It took about 2 years to get there.
Okay, well, what have been those, let's say, some crucial changes that have happened during these 14 years? anything that changes methodology or any new approaches that you have?
I really, I've taken on the lexical approach very much, because you were the one that convinced me. When we had our meeting, I was like, okay, because this is the funny thing with the lexical approach is that I actually take this approach very personally, because if I could turn back the clock, I would have learned German much more effectively and a lot faster, because even at university, we weren't taught how to learn vocab. I had to pretty much do it myself, writing down single units of words rather than as a chunk of language. I did at times. And I look back thinking, well, how I am as a teacher now, that's how I would have taught myself all those years ago. And I could have saved a lot of time. I could have become a lot more fluent, a lot quicker. I did eventually get to C2 level anyway, but the process could have been easier if I'd learned the right way, but we were never taught. And so when I was sort of teaching here in Moscow in the early days, I was still teaching like chunks of language. And when I taught students how to record it, I was always talking about chunks of language, because I actually got...
You have always been on the lexical side.
I've always been on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was still very much into the traditional way of explaining grammar at the same time, because I enjoy it, and I think students enjoy it as well. But it's like I even like I would say when it really came to fruition with the lexical approach was pretty much when I met you, because I've been doing it for a long time already. But when I teach, say, this CAE and especially now CPE, when it comes to passing this, yes, you've got to know your grammar. You've got to know it. You have to. But it's really about vocab. You've got to know the vocab. And so like what I do on my board behind me when I'm filming my videos, I just write so many chunks of language. You will never see one single word on the board, just chunks of language that students can transplant into their essays and speaking. And it's made a huge difference, like a massive difference to the overall result.
Yeah, I can make a comment that students like it more in the way that you trust them more. For example, when they get to understand how to find a chunk or a cliche or a good collocation, and they understand that they can use it in many more ways than just a single word. Yeah, they understand how smart they can be.
Exactly. And, I think the problem with many teachers is they don't show students how to do this properly. I think that's a problem, because I think, like, especially when we get to higher levels, like say FCE, CA, and CPE, or high-level IELTS, it's really the case of making use of authentic sources, like Psychology Today, the BBC, the Guardian, whatever. And students will very rarely, pay attention to the collocations, even if they know some particular words, but they've never seen them together. I tell them, write that down, copy it out, make your own examples based on the model. To remember it, and again, it's so that's the main thing about how I teach now. It really, really is, and as I said, it's made a massive difference.
Yeah, my students, they make glossaries for some lessons that we do, and sometimes I can get glossaries full of single words, and they just give it back by saying, "Okay, go look how other students do it," and because I've explained it many times. You are just lazy. You don't want to see.
Yeah.
You took very little time to complete this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sometimes they should be given more responsibility. They really can do more.
Absolutely. It's about like empowering the students to do it. But the thing is, as us teachers, we have to show them. It's about recycling that language as well. Like, for example, what I like about the book Outcomes is that I've actually taught a couple of them now. And I do like the book very, very much, because especially how, when you have that sort of first section of the unit, that language is going to appear again and again throughout. And I think it's very, very well done, because not many books do it as effectively as that. And I sort of try to sort of teach like that as well. So, for example, if I'm not going to say use Outcomes or whatever, I might use an authentic source from, say, the Guardian or like the Evening Standard, or Psychology Today, and say, right, we'll take some of these collocations that we found that look nice, that we think that we can use, and then let's try and recycle it by doing some kind of project or presentation or a kind of activity or whatever, and it stays there. It does.
What I like about Outcomes, because I'm a very ardent supporter of it, and I think that my language has skyrocketed since I started working with Outcomes, and I did a course with Hugh Della and Andrew Walkley, and
I've never met them.
Yeah, I asked him actually. I took an interview with him a couple of days ago, and I asked him whether you met each other, and he said, "Well, I know this guy on Facebook, but not yet."
No, we will. I kind of really like the guy, because what I think he's doing for the EFL world is the right thing, because again, it's not like a kind of magic pill that they're trying to find, because I think a lot of teachers still try to find this magic pill to make their teaching life easier. It's like, no, it's just an effective approach. It's just the way, because like we've said that, just knowing grammar is going to do nothing. I mean, if you've got some fixed phrases, you'll be able to communicate so much more with that. And I once listened to a blog with Hugh Deller, and when I just kind of thought, this is the guy that I look up to, he said it was about future perfect and future perfect continuous. But he said, you might as well only teach a few verbs with that. I thought, I so agree with that, because I tell my students is almost never used except in a few specific circumstances. It's like, even like when you have present simple to talk about, future timetables, you only need to learn it with a handful of verbs. It's very specific. So you can spend hours teaching the grammar. You just need to say, it's this with these verbs, and here are some examples. Let's learn them. Let's practice. There we go. And that's all you need. And I think that he struck a chord with me, because I really, really like what it is. But on the other hand, where I do differ a bit is that I do like to sometimes stand at the board or have some exercises with grammar only for the reason because students like that logical approach. They like to play with it. It's just something students like to do. So it's about me sort of catering to their needs a bit, but it doesn't take any major role in the lessons. Do you understand what I mean? That's the thing. It really is about vocabulary. And again, when I started doing outcomes a couple of years back, and I changed my approach to CAE and CPE, I actually started teaching grammar much less for these exam courses. I still did, but much less. And it was more about fixed phrases. So even like relative clauses, for example, instead of trying to teach all the grammar with relative clauses, which I did for a bit because it's important, I would teach things like as a result of which is why, which is when, some of which, these fixed phrases in combinations with other parts of a sentence. And students would transplant those into the essays, and immediately went to band 5 because it just sounded great.
Yeah, I see nothing against grammar, because grammar is actually inseparable from words.
It's a building block.
Yeah, building block. And sentences can be different. Even one separate sentence like you've been doing it for ages. Yeah, and if you ask students to make a story, yes, make some context connected with this grammar. So grammar will stop being just like something really strict. So it is very rich, and it is very contextual, and you can just relate different meanings.
Yeah, because I think because what's kind of quite interesting is that, because I do believe, we've got to know the grammar. So for example, if you're talking about conditionals, I mean, we need to know how they work and when they're used. Because, when you're going to learn some, say, lexical chunks, I mean, you don't want to learn them parrot-fashioned. You've got to be able to play with the language, because that's how you're going to learn, because you're going to make mistakes, but someone's going to correct you. And the more you are faced with English on a daily basis, say, from real authentic sources, you're going to correct yourself automatically over time and refine those uses a bit more. And I think that's important. That's really important. Again, that's why I say that one of the other big changes I've made to my teaching career is the use of authentic sources all the time. Not just textbooks, but authentic
This
sources.
is what I was going to ask, actually. What is the percentage? So during the class, how much authentic sources, your own personality, and the textbook?
I would say, okay, so with my personality, all of it. I would say with authentic sources, I would say, honestly, a good 40 to 50%. So they say from, say, various areas, especially it's difficult sometimes, because when you're doing CAE, CPE, you've got to supplement with real reading tasks that are in line with the Cambridge criteria. But I do a lot because of authentic sources, because the books just aren't challenging enough. Textbooks are just not challenging at all. Like if you look at, like, say, Gold First, it's well structured, I like it, but it's not enough. It's the same with Gold Advanced as well, or like Complete Advanced. Very good books, but not enough. And so I kind of understand that to get that A in the exam, it has to be so much more. And also, it's about raising the confidence as well, and authentic sources do that, because students think, I've just read something from The Guardian, I've understood it. And I force my students to do presentations very, very often. So, give them articles, to recycle that vocab, to share it with the class. Even online, we have these private groups, put the vocab up with your examples, etc. And I kind of believe in this principle that less is more. So it's not that I'm trying to overwhelm my students with authentic sources. I'd rather take a step back. Like the vocabulary in the textbook, I ignore it. The grammar, I ignore completely. I do my own stuff from authentic sources plus various other places as well, to really challenge students, because again, to get that A is very, very, very difficult, very, very difficult, and it needs to be done. But the textbook I use a bit, but I'm against teachers using textbooks all the time throughout lessons. If I have a teacher in my school that uses the textbook constantly, they're in trouble, because but outcomes is honestly one of those exceptions. Even though I have to say, I don't teach it every lesson because that's my style. I like to say do 3 lessons with it, and then I like to do 1 lesson, something completely non-related, just to kind of show other forms of vocab what I think is appropriate and things like that. But outcomes, it's very challenging. It's very challenging. The listenings, like I did the advanced one not long ago, and the listening tasks, they're really challenging. Like sometimes you're going to pre-teach vocab. It's like you're going to cover the entire board. But I like what it does.
They're huge. They're just very big.
And again, the thing I like about the audios from outcomes compared to, say, other textbooks is that the other textbooks, the listenings just seem to be very artificial for the sake of being artificial. And so when you do, say, like outcomes advanced and do some of the listenings, they're really tough for students. It could be even like quite overwhelming. So I do pre-teach some vocab. So if you don't, they're not going to get it, depending on the level of the class. But the thing is, it's like being an authentic source. That's what I like about it, because that's what you're going to hear on a daily basis if you went to England. Because how many times do we get students who, we teach them for years, they go to England or America and say, I understood nothing, by the way.
Yes.
Because they just weren't prepared properly. So where the listening is concerned, outcomes really deals with that. So it's a challenging task for the teacher, but the long-term effects of it are very, very beneficial.
And this is what I liked from the very first start about outcomes. For example, you can have a text about Mr. Trebus, who is a hoarder, who brings all kinds of rubbish into his house. And you can ask students, just open the internet and they will find a lot of extra information about this guy. And then they kind of get lost in what they read in outcomes and what they have learned about it, but it all benefits them really, really well, because I remember just thrashing the door into outer world open, and now I just walk out and back. And this is great.
Also, another thing with outcomes, which I like, because I actually bought all levels, because obviously I buy all the books, and I wanted to kind of assess them for myself. And one of the main criterion that I have is when I look through the language that a book provides, I think, is it generically relevant? Because some books like to include idioms or phrasal verbs. I think that's just not common. That's just not one of those sort of high frequency words. Why would you use that? And in outcomes, I would say 95% of it is something I would say I would use that. And I know my family, my parents would use that language as well. It's suitable. That's the thing. And also, on one hand, when it comes to sort of having to supplement tasks, which I believe the teacher should do, sometimes outcomes, you don't feel the necessity to have to replace the tasks. Maybe you can expand on something.
Add. Yes, you can add something.
You can expand them, but you don't have to replace them. Like with English file, a book that I don't have English file in my school anymore. It's banned. It's illegal. That's another reason I fell in love with Hugh Deller, because I listened to one of his blogs and he talked about English. I was like, I agree with this guy. I agree that it's a horrible book. And so many Russian teachers are going to be disappointed. I know they are. I've experienced it on my VK page as well. But when Hugh Deller talked about English file, everything he said, everything I agreed with completely. Agreed. I know it's going to make me unpopular, but who cares? But that's just the way it is. So that's why actually we're ordering we're going to be ordering hundreds of books for the school for all the students. And also we wrote to Hugh Deller asking about the online version of his books, but I don't think there is an e-version yet, because my school is really predominantly online. We're getting hundreds and hundreds of students and for other levels, and we want to be able to have a system where we can sell outcomes, the e-version, to all the students, because I really don't believe, and I'm really against it when some schools buy one book.
You need just to contact Hugh. You need to write to him about it.
I think we did. I'm not sure what happened. My administrator dealt with that, so I'll check.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very good book. It's a very, very good book.
Okay, yeah, the book is good, and students really learn from it.
Yep.
Now let's return back to teaching. I know that you are just overloaded with work. You work all the time. You work 24/7.
Yeah.
Do you get burnt out?
Yep, I did earlier this year. I came close to just packing it all in, really. Very close. It was like, it kind of irritates me when I see people's pictures, like John is at Heathrow Airport traveling to Spain. It's like, oh, shut up. I'm stuck in my office, like having to like work constantly. Because, I got burnt out because I'm working really hard to sort of build the school and its reputation. And, I made some mistakes with staff members or, the wrong decisions with marketing or whatever. That happens. But I learned from it. And when summer came around, I'd finished with lots of classes in my school and dealing with other teachers and other issues. And I just collapsed, basically. My VK posts became less frequent, and I still did them. And I kind of recycled some of the old ones and I said to myself, do you know what, I'm just going to take the summer off. And so I literally took the whole summer off, just resting, doing sports, seeing my daughter, enjoying time to myself. And I lost my mojo, so to speak, my motivation. Yeah. And I tried to find ways to get it back. And so I started making posts. I started actually meeting some teachers and listening to them and getting that feeling back. I need to help them. I need to help them. I need to help them. So it came back in now. We're creating this CPE course online, the first of its kind in the entire world. And it's going really, really, really well. And that's kind of just fueled me with motivation once again. But yeah, the burnout phase, it happens to most people, but you don't want to let it sort of run your life because it almost ruined me. And it was really tough. And then to get pneumonia not long after, it's like, when does it end?
It's just your organism telling you, just warning you.
Yeah, it's kind of like
if you're not careful.
Yeah, I'm a typical guy.
Really
I'm ill. Like I've got the flu. I go back to work after 2 days, still ill. Then I get it worse again. That's just sort of the kind of guy that I am. But yeah, many teachers get burnout, and I think that it's like if I always say to teachers, if they don't have the ability to take a step back to have some rest, try a different approach. Try something completely new. If you're in the EFL world, one advantage that teachers have is if a class is really getting them down that they can't manage, or just ask someone to swap classes or replace whatever. In a high school, that's a lot more difficult. But try a different approach. Try something brand new that might kind of spark that interest once again.
I sometimes get my students to teach some issues.
Yeah, it's
they
great.
Like it very much.
It's great. Yeah, I had these CAE teenagers that finished in summer. And many of them got A's. It's incredible. And they did a lot of teaching as well. So I said, here's the stuff, you do it. What are you going to do? I'm going to go to sleep. I'm like, you're that good. I'm just going to sit here and listen to you. She has nothing to say. It was perfect. Next one, up you go, kind of thing.
Yeah. Good thing to do one time or another.
Yeah, not every lesson, I would say.
Yeah. Okay, Paul, it's always so nice to talk to you, and I hope that you will come to St. Petersburg soon. And
I can do now.
Give a seminar to teachers, or join our, I'm also running a club for teachers. It is called A Cup of Teaching. And we get together, we drink tea, and we discuss some really important issues for ourselves. And the bunch of people which I have gathered around Живой Английский is very, very good. And I can say that sometimes we can really learn from each other and get
absolutely. That's what the whole teaching sphere should be about. I think, unfortunately, too many people see it as a competition. No, we're a big family. We should all work together and help one another. That's how we get there.
I think there are slots, teacher slots for everyone. We all get our students, the ones who want to just to study with us. Yeah, too competitive, not very good about teaching, because then we will lose kind of our humane approach and everything.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much, Paul.
You're welcome.
Guys, if you have any other questions to Paul, you can always write in the comments, and we will organize another video for us.
Anytime.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Bye.